What lurks in the shadows? Discover a world of fear with these unsettling short horror stories. A group of friends and a gold watch. A small-town sheriff faces a shape-shifting nightmare. A tunnel worker encounters something inhuman, and a smiling beast hides in plain sight. These are just a few of the dark tales waiting to be unleashed. Watch if you dare. Time wants your soul. The dust in the Grand Atherton Hotel was less a layer and more a primal component of the air itself. It coated everything, settling on the drop cloths that covered spectral furniture, blurring the peeling gilt wallpaper into abstract patterns, and clinging to our clothes like a second skin. But it was our dust, our project. Jim, May, Annie, Mark, Jane, and I, we'd pooled everything and bought this derelict relic of a bygone era. The plan was ambitious: restore its faded glory, turn it into a boutique hotel. We had 10 workers, a tight budget, endless optimism, and a bond forged over 2 decades of shared life. That bond felt like the only solid thing in the hotel's shifting, decaying structure. We were inseparable. Weekends weren't weekends unless we were together. Holidays were communal events. Our triumphs and failures were shared. This renovation was supposed to be our crowning achievement, a testament to our friendship. Then we found the watch. It was in a hidden compartment behind a loose panel in the master suite's dressing room, a room that felt colder than the rest of the hotel, even in the height of summer. Jim prized the panel open, his crowbar groaning against ancient wood. Inside, nestled on a bed of decaying velvet, was a pocket watch. It was gold, heavy, intricately engraved with patterns that seemed to shift subtly in the light. The face had Roman numerals, but the hands, they weren't there. Just a void where they should be. And yet, pressed against my ear, I could hear it. A faint, irregular tick, tick, tick. It wasn't the steady rhythm of a normal watch. It sounded strained, like a weary heart struggling against an immense pressure. May, ever the sensitive one, shivered despite the heat. "Put it back, Jim," she whispered, her voice tight. "It feels wrong." Mark, always practical, scoffed lightly. "Wrong? It's probably antique, May. Could be worth something." Jane, the pragmatic researcher of the group, took it from Jim, turning it over in her hands. "There are no maker's marks," she observed, frowning. "And the gold? It's unlike anything I've seen." Annie, curious, reached out to touch it. As her finger brushed the cold metal, a faint, high-pitched whine emanated from the watch. The air around it seemed to vibrate. Annie snatched her hand back, startled. I just watched, a knot forming in my stomach. There was something about the silence that fell after the whine, the way the dust motes seemed to hang frozen in the air for a beat too long, that felt deeply unsettling. We didn't put it back. We didn't know how to. The compartment snapped shut, and no amount of pushing or probing would reopen it. Jim shrugged, tucking the watch into his pocket. Souvenir then. Maybe a weird paperweight. That was a Monday. The first death wasn't one of us. It was one of the workers, a guy named Gary. Nice enough fellow, always humming off-key. He was working on the ballroom floor late Tuesday afternoon. The other workers packed up around 5. Gary stayed later to finish a section. We found him the next morning. Or what was left of him. He wasn't just dead. He was desiccated. Like he'd aged 100 years in a few hours. His skin was like brittle parchment pulled taut over bone, his eyes sunk in voids. But the truly horrific part was his hand. It was reaching out, fingers twisted into claws, pointing at something unseen near the grand piano. And his face was a mascara of pure terror, his mouth stretched open in a silent scream that felt like it could still be heard echoing in the dust motes. The police called it a bizarre medical anomaly, maybe accelerated dehydration coupled with a stroke. They were baffled, wrote it up, left. We knew better. We looked at each other, then at the watch Jim had placed on the mantelpiece in the temporary office downstairs. It was ticking again. That same strained, irregular beat. Unease settled over the hotel, thick and suffocating as the dust. The remaining workers were jittery. 2 didn't show up on Thursday. 3 more quit by Friday, muttering about bad vibes and that old money pit. May was next. Thursday evening. She was sorting through some salvaged light fixtures in the dining room. I was in the next room going over blueprints. I heard her gasp, a sharp intake of breath, followed by a sound that wasn't a scream, but more like tearing fabric, wet and sickeningly fast. I ran in. May was on the floor. Her body was disintegrating. Not like rotting, but like time was accelerating her decomposition to impossible speeds. Her flesh was sloughing off, revealing bone that instantly turned to dust. Her eyes evaporated in their sockets. It was happening in seconds, horrifyingly quick. I could only stand frozen as my friend, my dear May, became a pile of fine gray powder and a few scraps of clothing on the dusty floor. And over the sounds of my own retching, I could hear it. Closer now. The desperate, frantic tick, tick, tick. Panic set in. Full, cold, paralyzing panic. We gathered in the office, staring at the watch. Jim tried to smash it with a hammer. It rang like a bell, completely undamaged. Mark tried to throw it out the window. It rebounded off the glass as if the pane were solid steel. Jane tried to bury it in concrete mix outside. Within minutes, the concrete around it had cracked and weathered as if decades had passed, and the watch lay exposed and ticking on the surface. We couldn't rid ourselves of it. It was bound to the house, or perhaps now to us. Time, Annie whispered, her eyes wide and fixed on the watch. It's like time itself is weaponized. Mark, strong and usually unflappable, was trembling. What does it want? I remembered the feeling when Annie touched it, the wine, the frozen dust. It wants something. From us. Souls? Jane suggested, voice flat. Like the old stories? An old place, a strange artifact. Maybe it's sentient. And it's hungry. We tried to leave. Packed bags, got in Jim's truck. But as we drove away from the hotel gates, the road ahead seemed endless, unchanging. The hotel loomed in the rearview mirror, visible no matter how far we drove. After an hour of driving in a straight line, we were still at the gates. We were trapped. The hotel, or whatever was in it, held us in a pocket outside normal time and space. The remaining workers fled that night, melting away into the darkness, their fear overriding whatever unseen barrier held us. We heard a few screams echo in the distance, cut short. We didn't look. We couldn't. Jim, ever the leader, tried to rationalize. It's the stress, the fear causing hallucinations. We need sleep. But his eyes were wild. He didn't make it through the night. We found him slumped in his chair the next morning, his body grotesquely swollen and discolored, his veins prominent like a dark, intricate map on his skin. It looked like every moment of time he was meant to live had been compressed into a single agonizing instant within his body, overwhelming and bursting him from within. The watch was on his desk, ticking. 3 of us left, Annie, Jane, and me. The silence in the hotel was now punctuated only by the infernal ticking and our own ragged breaths. Grief was a physical weight compounding the terror. Jim, May gone. Brutally, impossibly gone. Jane, quiet and brilliant, spent hours poring over old newspaper clippings we found in the hotel office. She discovered the hotel's original owner in the 1890s, a reclusive horologist obsessed with temporal mechanics, rumored to be dabbling in forbidden arts to stop time or control it. There were whispers of strange experiments, of servants disappearing, of a chronal device he was building before he vanished without a trace. He tried to harness time, Jane murmured, tracing a finger over a faded article. Maybe he didn't harness it. Maybe he bound something that became the watch. Or is in the watch. That night, Annie was sketching in the grand ballroom, trying to find solace in art. I was keeping watch downstairs. Jane was still buried in research. The ticking, it wasn't coming from the office anymore. It seemed to be everywhere, soft but insistent, like 1,000 tiny clocks hidden in the walls. Then a sound from the ballroom. Not a scream this time, but a sound of shattering, like fragile glass breaking into a million pieces, followed by silence. I ran upstairs, heart hammering. Annie was gone. The only sign she had been there was her sketch pad on the floor. The drawing on it was of the pocket watch, rendered in exquisite detail, but the lines seemed to vibrate, and the space around it was fractured like shattered glass. And near the drawing, there was a small pile of crystalline dust, shimmering faintly in the moonlight filtering through the grimy windows. As I watched, it dispersed on a non-existent breeze. Annie hadn't been killed. She had been unmade. shattered like time itself had turned her into fragile glass and then broken her. Only Jane and I remained. We didn't speak much. What was there to say? We were trapped in this decaying prison with an entity that consumed time and existence. The ticking was loud now, almost a roar in our ears. It seemed to emanate from the watch itself, which sat on the ballroom floor where Annie's dust had been. The air around it shimmered, distorting the view of the room beyond. "It's drawing us in," Jane said, her voice steady despite the fear etched on her face. "It's getting stronger here. This must be where he did it." She looked at the watch. "Time wants your soul," she repeated the prompt's chilling phrase. "It's not just killing us. It's absorbing our existence. Our past, our present, our future. Everything we are in time." A tendril of shimmering, distorted air reached out from the watch, snaking towards us. It moved too fast, too slow, impossible to track visually. Jane didn't hesitate. "David." She used my name the first time in the story, grounding me, the narrator. "Run. Get out. If one of us makes it, maybe you can warn someone, or find a way to stop it." "No." I yelled, but she was already moving. She ran towards the watch, not to destroy it, but straight into that shimmering distortion. The result was instantaneous and horrific. It wasn't violent in the way Jim died. It was worse. It was an erasure. Jane's form blurred, stretched, compressed, and then simply vanished from sight. Not just her body, but her presence. My memory of her flickered like a faulty projector bulb. I had to actively fight to remember her face, her laugh, the shared history we had just talked about minutes ago. It felt like time was trying to scrub her from reality, starting with my mind. I stood alone in the ballroom, the ticking deafening. The shimmering distortion around the watch expanded. I could feel its pull, a sense of being stretched thin like a photograph being distorted. It smelled of ozone and something metallic like old clockwork mechanisms. "Run," Jane had said. "Run." I turned and ran. I didn't know where I was going, just away from that horrific ticking, that consuming void. I ran through the crumbling corridors, the dust thick, the floorboards groaning. I felt the air grow colder behind me, the ticking pursuing. I stumbled out of the hotel service entrance, collapsing onto the overgrown lawn. The air outside felt thin, too bright. The hotel behind me stood silent, menacing, not a single light on. I looked at my hand. It looked normal. I felt my heart pounding. Normal. But something was irrevocably wrong. The ticking wasn't coming from the hotel anymore. It was coming from inside my head. Faint but constant. And sometimes, when I look at the clock on my wall, the hands whirl backward for a second. Sometimes people I'm talking to seem to flicker, briefly replaced by a distorted image of a screaming face or a pile of dust. Sometimes the air around me takes on that metallic ozone smell. I escaped the Grand Atherton Hotel, but I didn't escape time. Time wants your soul. It took Jim, May, Annie, Mark, and Jane. It took the workers. It took the hotel's past and its potential future. And I know, with a certainty colder than any fear I felt within those walls, that it's still ticking, still waiting. And it's coming for me. It has all the time in the world. The Skin Stealer. The November wind nipped through the hollow trunk of the oak, bringing with it the scent of wet soil and something ironish and tart. For Sheriff Brody, that stench was the precursor to a familiar feeling of dread. This was the smell of the Skin Stealer. His hands clasped the steering wheel of his patrol car, knuckles white against the beaten leather. 3 students each disappearing within the last 3 weeks, their point of origin disappeared without a trace, leaving nothing behind but an unsettling silence and that metallic tang in the air. The official line was wild animals, but Brody knew better. He'd seen the aftermath a year before, on his first case back in this forlorn corner of Kentucky. He'd witnessed the sloughed skin, an ugly tapestry of crumpled, spent humanity left behind in the woods. He drove up to the deserted Johnson farm. The tractor lay abandoned in the field, its engine cold. Inside the farmhouse, Mary Johnson's knitting sat half-finished over the armchair. The smell hung thick in the air, stronger here, suffocating. It stuck to the back of his throat, wanting to make him gag. "Mary?" he shouted, his voice breaking the stillness. Only the wind answered. Brody unsheathed his sidearm, the cold steel a relief against his clammy hand. He paced through the house, his boots thudding against the scuffed floorboards. It was all as though Mary had simply walked away for a moment, a cup of tea cooling on the table, a book lying open beside it. But Mary wasn't here. Not anymore. He found it in the barn. Behind a pile of hay bales, invisible to the casual observer, a patch of disturbed earth. He knelt, tugging and brushing away the dirt. Her skin lay beneath that, buried in the rotting straw. Brody turned away, overcome with a wave of nausea. The skin had been carefully flayed, almost surgically removed. The eyes were missing, replaced by gaping, empty sockets. The mouth was stretched in a soundless, ghastly scream. "Damn it," he whispered, the word croaking in his throat. He knew what this meant. The stealer was wearing her. It was out there pretending to be Mary. He backed out of the barn, glib, his mind some sensation he gave. He had to warn everyone. But who could he trust? The stealer could be anyone. He returned to town, suspicion eating away at his suspicion like a corrosive acid. He passed Mrs. Peterson watering her petunias, old man Hemlock tending his garden, little Timmy Jenkins pedaling his bicycle, a gap-toothed grin on his face. Any number of them could be the monster. Back at the sheriff's office, Deputy Miller glanced away from his paperwork. "Find anything, Sheriff?" Brody looked into Miller's face, looking for some telltale sign, some twitch of something unnatural. Miller was a rookie, green, the kind of kid who still believed in justice. "Miller, yeah," Brody said slowly, voice tight. "I found something. I want you to round up all the men in town, every single one, and tell them it's an emergency town meeting. No excuses." Miller appeared bewildered but didn't protest. He trusted Brody. As the townsfolk convened at the town hall, Brody took to the stage, his face grim. He looked through the crowd, his eyes paused on each face. He noticed anxiety, bewilderment, and a flicker of anxiety. "I realize this is sudden," he began, his voice reverberating through the room. "But we have a problem. A serious problem." He told them of the disappearances of Mary Johnson, of the skin. He didn't sugarcoat it. He made it all plain, the raw, horrifying truth. The room roared with a storm of disbelief and terror. Finger-pointing, accusations flew. Brody turned, waving his hand in the air to quiet the din. "There's only one way to find out," he said, his voice harsh. "Everybody here takes their shirt off. Now." A token gasp went up in the room. Protests broke out, driven by outrage and fear. But Brody stood his ground. One by one, the men started to obey, their faces lined with apprehension. There were scars and tattoos and the usual imperfections of human skin for all to see. Brody's heart raced as he watched. He examined each torso, looking for the telltale clues, the subtle splotchiness, the slightly wrong texture, the uncanny perfection. Then he saw it. On a guy named Earl, a quiet farmer who never bothered anybody. There was a small, nearly invisible scar just below the shoulder blade on his back. But Brody knew it. It was the scar from when, as a child, Mary Johnson fell off her horse. A guttural roar shattered the silence. Earl's body started to twist and shift, his skin rippled and stretched. His eyes expanded, leaving a milk-white color. He charged at Brody, fingers becoming grotesque claws. The town erupted into chaos. People screamed and ran, rushing for the exits. Brody shot off his weapon, but it seemed to have little effect on the bullets. The stealer was outrageously strong, inhumanly impervious. The battle was brutal, a no-holds-barred struggle for survival. Brody was able to take the beast down, but it was no simple task. He was bruised and bloody, but he had stopped it. For now. The chaos subsided, and Brody loomed above the captured creature whose human facade was finally losing its form and exposing the underlying abhorrence. He knew this wasn't the end. There were others. And he was the only one who knew what they were. It was a scent that came with the metallic taste of fear, a thickening of the air which announced that something was wrong, and not just with the filthy humanity to which one nakedly belonged. Brody did not have to know that his vigil had hardly begun. The skin stealer was over, but the terror it had wrought would be forever branded on the soul of this small Kentucky town. And Brody, the sheriff who knew too much, was left to stand watch, always watching, always minding what he knew to be going on below. The one-eyed stranger. The wind roared like a banshee, scratching at the shutters of Ilara's bakery. Rain pelted against the window panes, smudging the gaslight into halos of shiny gold. A little bell, normally so cheerful, jangled mournfully as it clanged when the door creaked open. Ilara lifted her head from some kneading dough, sighing wearily. Another soul risking the storm for a stale loaf? But the figure standing in the doorway wasn't a neighbor or a weary traveler. It was a shape shrouded in shadows, the rain soaking the cloth to a bony frame. A single eye, radiant with an unnatural fire, gazed at her from the depths of the hood. He didn't say a word, just stood there, dripping and quiet. Ilara, despite the oddness, felt strangely gravitated. She'd seen him before, hadn't she? A half-remembering, a glancing view on another storm-raked night years before. Finally he rasped, his voice a grinding of stones. "You yearn, baker girl. I can offer satisfaction." Ilara's heart jumped. She did yearn. She wanted her tiny bakery to succeed, to finally eliminate the crushing debt her father had saddled her with. She craved a life without the constant gnawing anxiety. I don't get it," she stammered. The one-eyed stranger stepped closer, the smell of moist dirt and something bitter, like burnt sugar, nourishing the air. "A wish, baker girl. One wish granted, full measure. For it to price." Ilara's rational brain was screaming at her to slam the door. But the temptation to escape the life she had found, the desperate ember of hope that burned inside her, was too much. "What price?" she said, hardly above a whisper. His head tilted, the one eye glinting. "Something precious, something you hold dear." Over the next hour, sitting together over a lukewarm cup of tea, the stranger explained. He was a provider of wishes, a trader of fates. He provided what others did not, but his coin was not gold, not silver, but pieces of the soul. He was clear: the greater the desire, the greater the sacrifice. Haunted bushes in the made of bark, and she, terrified, as if he had transported her in the world of the ashes. "A very big wish," said the stranger thoughtfully. "The price, your memories of your mother." The words hit Ilara like a punch to the gut. Her mother had died when she was small, but the memories she possessed were precious, embers of a love that still warmed her. With the laughter, the lullaby of her life, with the smell of lavender she wrapped around like a shawl. Tears welled in her eyes. I can't." The stranger shrugged, the motion barely visible. "As you wish, baker girl. But opportunity knocks but once on a night like this." He turned to leave. He'd barely stepped to the door when Ilara shouted, "Stop! What if I had something else I could contribute?" The stranger reversed course, one eye piercing her. "How else could a lowly baker girl design to offer you the fame and fortune you seek?" Clutching at her throat in rising desperation, Ilara dredged up the image of her most prized possession, her father's recipe book. He was a master baker, his work legendary. To lose the book would be to lose part of him, of their mutual love. "I will give you the recipe book," she said shakily. The stranger appeared to be pondering. "It has potential. It will suffice. But know this, baker girl, once the bargain is made, it cannot be unmade." Ilara, trained to swallow, the weight of the decision was crushing. But the dream of her bakery, bustling and flourishing, filled her mind. She pictured how peaceful it would feel to not owe anybody anything, the rapture of doing something wonderful. "I agree," she whispered. The stranger smiled, a too sweet and sickening sight. He reached with a skeletal hand, and Ilara, trembling, handed her father's recipe book into his grip. "Tonight," and his voice was only a whisper above the storm's din, "your wish is realized." And then he was gone in the swirling dark of night. By morning the storm had moved on. The sun shone bright, gilding the rain-washed streets. Ilara felt different, a feeling of buoyancy but also a peculiarly empty feeling. She headed into her workspace, the smell of yeast and flour uncomfortably foreign. Then she spotted it, a line of shoppers zigzagging down the block, their expressions expectant. Their bakery had become, overnight, the talk of the town. Not bread, not cake, not pastries, all using recipes she didn't remember learning, flavors she didn't recall experimenting with. The bakery flourished beyond her wildest dreams. But when the weeks turned into months and the fame of her bakery soared, a harrowing truth struck Ilara. She couldn't remember what her father looked like. The smell of his pipe tobacco, the stories he told, gone, replaced by a murky, aching void. He was just a baker, someone to whom she had only a dim recollection of being related. The victory felt empty, poisoned. She had achieved her wish, but at a terrible cost. She had exchanged her memories, the very building blocks of her identity, for ephemeral stardom. She now existed in a world in which her biggest accomplishment was made possible by the basis of her biggest loss. Ilara waited for the next stormy night when the winds would howl and the rain falls against the windows. She knew he would return. And as the little bell above the door chimed and the one-eyed strange stood before her, wrapped in shadow, she knew exactly what she had to do. She would bargain once more, only this time to reverse the wrong, to get back what she had so carelessly bartered away. But she also knew it with a heart-stopping definiteness. Together, the price this time would be incalculably greater. The one-eyed stranger always collected his IOUs. The man in the woods. In the old wing of the hospital, forgotten and silent, the air hung heavy. Nurse Anya shivered and hugged her worn cardigan tighter. Night shifts here always made her feel uneasy. The conditions were especially grim tonight. A blackout had knocked out power to the wing, and the long, vacant corridors were illuminated only by the pale flickering of emergency lamps. She'd been doing her rounds, checking in on the 2 patients who remained in this part, when she heard it. Clicking, faint and rhythmic, like dry twigs bracketing footsteps. It was coming from room 312, Mr. Abernathy's room. Anya's breath caught and her heart thudded against her ribs. Mr. Abernathy was a frail old man, a skeleton himself already practically. What could make such a sound? With hesitation, she opened the door. The room was dim, the lone emergency lamp casting long, dancing shadows. Mr. Abernathy was lying perfectly still in his bed, his eyes wide open and empty. He didn't seem to notice her. Then Anya saw it. A figure hunkered down at the foot of the bed, cast in shadow, its form vague and indistinguishable. It was thin, impossibly so, nearly skeletal itself. And in its hands, cupped gently like rare artifacts, were bones. Small finger bones. Anya was swept with a wave of nausea. It was the sound of bones going off. Torn, scraped, and stripped from Mr. Abernathy's still living physique. She noticed the figure it was pointing to. It worked with the precision of a cue stick, long fingers sliding with unsettling grace. It splintered bone after bone, each click a little hammer blow to Anya's sanity. She sat frozen with fear as the creature meticulously piled the smaller bones onto something like an altar of bedsheets. Finally, it arrived at Mr. Abernathy's wrist. Anya felt the urge to scream, to flee, but she stood frozen in place, ensnared in a nightmare of her own design. With one last, nauseating pop, the ulna and radius were liberated. The creature took them both in hand as if admiring its work and tossed them onto the pile. Then its head, if it could be called that, snapped up. 2 pinpricks of red light pierced the gloom, centering on Anya. There was no way to know if it was eyeing her with malice, curiosity, or something else altogether. It was fear that finally shattered Anya's paralysis. She spun on her heels and ran as the sound of her footsteps receded down the long, shadowy hallway. She didn't even care about where she was running to, she just wanted to be far away from the horror she saw. Not stopping until she reached the nurse's station, gasping for air, her mind shattered. She stammered a description of what she had seen to the on-duty doctor, a weary resident named Dr. Sharma. Dr. Sharma listened intently, his face unyielding. "Nurse Anya, you've been working a long time," he said gently. "It can play mind games," said the power outage, the isolation. "I'll check on Mr. Abernathy." Anya paused, heart racing. Dr. Sharma came back a few minutes later, his face grim. "Mr. Abernathy is stable," he said, avoiding the words. "But he's unresponsive, and his hands are compromised severely. We are going to have to run some tests." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Doctors and specialists inundated the hospital, puzzled by Mr. Abernathy's state. It was not until the X-ray that the truth, his bones failed. Not fractured, not dissolved, just gone. The official cause was a rare form of degenerative bone condition, aggravated by his age and pre-existing health conditions. But Anya knew the truth. She'd seen the bone collector. She became enthralled, scouring ancient folklore, dusty medical texts. She came to hear of other legends, hushed accounts of beings that drained the essence of their prey, leaving them empty and hollow. She knew she had to do something, but what? Who would believe her? She was simply a tired, overworked nurse, hallucinating in the dark. Then one night she saw another patient, Mrs. Davison, in room 314, complaining of a strange sensation in her legs. It was portion of the same room next door to Mr. Abernathy. Anya's blood ran cold. She could no longer allow it to happen. This time she would be ready. Anya had armed herself with what she could scrounge up: a crucifix, a bottle of holy water, and a sharpened bone saw she had found hidden away in a dusty storage room. Absurd, she thought, but she felt it was worth a shot. That night she sat a vigil outside Mrs. Davison's room, her senses heightened. The clicking began again, softer this time, barely heard. Anya took a deep breath and opened the door. The bone collector was there, a skeleton crouched on Mrs. Davison's bed, its long fingers already going to work on her foot. This time Anya did not hesitate. Letting out a primal roar of defiance, she charged at the creature, holding the bone saw aloft. The bone collector jumped back, red eyes widening with surprise. It hissed, a sound like dry leaf skeletons rustling in a graveyard, and turned to face Anya. The crucifix was of no use. The holy water served no purpose. But as Anya swung the bone saw, driven by sheer terror and adrenaline, it hit. The blade hit the creature's arm, and a small, brittle bone clattered to the floor. The thing screamed, a pitchy, keening wail that reverberated up and down the hospital wing. It shrank back from the impact, its form shuddering and undefined. With a last, frustrated hiss, it disappeared, dissolved into the shadows. Mrs. Davison was shaken but unhurt. Anya had saved her. But she knew the bone collector was still out there, hiding in shadows, ready to descend upon that next victim. Anya left the residential hospital a short time later, unable to fathom a second night shift at that cursed place. The bone collector's legacy haunts her, an ever-present specter that serves as both a warning and a reminder that the darkest depths of humanity's depravity often remain out of sight. It will always be waiting, awaiting its next meal, preying on the vulnerable and the left behind, she knows. And she knows, too, that somewhere, a hospital wing is still haunted by the clicking sound of bones being taken. The locked door. The Grand Majestic Hotel was a pastiche of faded grandeur. It was once a palace of luxury, its carpets heavy with the footsteps of 1,000 lost men, and the chandeliers swayed with an aching breath in the drafts that moaned through its weary limbs. It was the kind of place where secrets clung to the wallpaper like dust motes to a sunbeam. I was in room 314 on the 3rd floor, a standard, if a bit threadbare, single. It was an unremarkable assignment: audit the hotel's notoriously messy accounts. But my attention had been seized all the same by room 315, right next to mine. Room 315 is permanently locked. The manager, a sweating, nervous man named Mr. Henderson, shrugged and mumbled something about a broken hinge and a long-ago refurbishment project. "Best to just ignore it, Mr. Davies," he'd said, eyes flitting. It was impossible, however, to ignore it. It began on my second night. Thwack, a rhythmic knocking. 3 hard knocks on the door, a pause, another 3. Knock, 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 pause, knock, knock, knock. It reverberated against the wall, magnified by the eerie stillness of the hotel's long, empty corridors. I got my bed away from the shared wall in hopes I could muffle the sound, but it didn't stop. By the 3rd night, sleep had become a luxury I could no longer afford. The knocking had grown more insistent, more desperate. It was followed by a soft scratching sound, like nails scraping against wood. The curiosity gnawed at me. Henderson was clearly up to something. I decided to investigate. First, I tried the obvious. I jiggled the handle of 315. Locked. I looked through the keyhole but saw only swirling darkness. I attempted the master key I had for my own room. No luck. We could tell the lock was deadbolt from inside or possibly even jammed. Then I remembered blueprints of the hotel, tucked away in a dusty archive I had come across during my audit. I spent an afternoon perusing them and recovered a crumbling map of the third floor. Clicking on the link, I was surprised to see it reveal a small, connecting door between 314 and 315, hidden behind the wardrobe in either room. That night I took a screwdriver into my room and, feeling a mounting sense of dread, dismantled the wardrobe. The wall behind it was empty, lined with dark, varnished wood. I rapped the paneling, looking for a telltale hollow sound. Finally I found it. I pried the wood free with a grunt, uncovering a narrow, rectangular opening. Behind it was a door. A plain wooden door, pockmarked and scratched. And through it, I heard the unmistakable sounds of frenzied knocking and scratching. My heart raced inside my ribs. I pressed my ear to the wood. "Hello." My voice shook as I whispered, "Is someone there?" The knocking stopped. A dull, racking voice responded, almost inaudibly. "Help me." I hesitated. What was going on? Was this some sort of elaborate practical joke? Or something much darker? But the desperation in the voice, pure pleading for help, stoked me into action. I tried the handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. I took a deep breath and slammed my shoulder into the door. The old wood creaked in protest to that. I pounded again and again, and finally, with a splintering crack, the lock surrendered. I opened the door slowly, gazing into the darkness. The room shadowy, lit only by a white strand of light passing through a dirty window. Dust and decay hung heavy in the air. And then I saw her. A woman hunched over in the corner, her face hidden behind a tangle of matted hair. She was gaunt, her clothes tattered, her eyes terrified. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice little more than a whisper. Her eyes met mine and she looked up. They locked me in here," she croaked, her voice hoarse from neglect. They said I was insane." "Who are they?" I asked, tentatively entering the room. She didn't answer. Instead, she gestured to the wall on my right. Scrawled on it in what appeared to be dried blood were words. Words that struck terror into my very marrow. "Do not disturb room 315. She knows too much." Then a knock came again suddenly. 3 sharp knocks, a pause, then 3 more. But this time it wasn't inside the room. It was from the corridor outside. And as the knocking became louder, drew closer, I heard Mr. Henderson's voice calling my name. "Mr. Davies? Mr. Davies, are you all right in there?" And when I opened it, I knew with a conviction that took my breath away that I had unlocked more than a door. I had unlocked a secret, and I was about to pay the price. What would I do to protect the woman, and to extricate myself from the clutches of the Grand Majestic Hotel's dark past? The knocking became more compelling and the shadows in the room deepened, waiting. I was running out of time to choose. The midnight bus. Once upon a time, in the sleepy little town of Meadow Grove, there was a bus route that everyone would whisper about. This was not the typical bus route, because this one led its passengers to a destination that did not show up on any map. Bus 323 was a big old bus, the type from earlier decades, with a unique midnight blue coloring and the "Midnight Bus" on the side in silver letters. The bus would pull up at midnight each day to the community square, and the scattered townsfolk would clamber on board, heading off to this elusive place. Nobody knew where the bus went because it didn't take the same route twice. It would glimmer its way through twisting country roads, up vertiginous mountainsides, across sweeping deserts, and while the hours made the turn of 1 in the morning, 2, 3, and so on. The bus was piloted by an equally enigmatic character referred to only as the driver. He was a tall, thin man with a close-cropped beard and piercing blue eyes. Each passenger was greeted with a warm smile and firm handshake from the driver, who was always dressed in a sharp black suit, crisp white shirt, and fresh black tie. His voice was comforting and gentle, and he had a gift for making everyone feel at home and secure. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who loved to go on adventures. A girl full of curiosity, one who never turned down an adventure. So when the magical bus offered itself, how could she turn it down? As the clock struck midnight and the midnight bus glimmered into appearance, Lily stood in the town square, gripping on her small backpack. The driver welcomed Lily when she got on the bus. "Welcome to the midnight bus, young lady," he said smoothly like he was pouring hot silk on the floor. "Where do you want to go tonight?" "I don't know," said Lily, her eyes as big as saucers. "Where does this bus normally go?" The driver chuckled. "That, my dear, is the magic of the midnight bus. It follows you wherever you want to go. Just tell me where you want to go and we'll get there." Lily pondered for a moment and then her face lit up into a smile. "I want to go to the most magical place on earth," she exclaimed. The driver nodded and the midnight bus took its snaky route. It cruised through enchanted forests teeming with glowing fairies, along the shore of a sparkling ocean where friendly mermaids swam, and over a meadow of lollipop trees that bent seductively in the breeze. It was stunningly beautiful, and Lily felt she was dreaming. But the midnight bus didn't stop there. It flew Lily to the most magical places Lily had ever seen. They explored secret gardens of dreams, soared with dragons through the clouds, and waltzed with speaking beasts in the lunar glow. Lily giggled and crooned and frolicked with her new friends, and she felt a sense of wonder and delight she had never before felt. Finally, the sun cracked the horizon and the midnight bus returned to the town square. The driver, indeed, helped Lily thank the journey in her own heart for that amazing adventure. The driver smiled and nodded and approached Lily as she stepped off the bus and said, "Remember, my dear, the midnight bus will always be here waiting for you when you need a dash of magic in your life." Noah took Lily home, and her mind flitted back to the most magical night of her life. She couldn't wait to share her experience with her friends and family, but she knew that words alone could never do justice to the magic and wonder of the midnight bus and the mysterious adventure it offered. After that night, Lily was just another passenger on the midnight bus, bound for adventure and magic every night to come. For the bus was her home away from home, where the mundane of the rest of life could not intrude on her journeys to the happiest place on earth. And with every journey, Lily's heart expanded with love, joy, and gratitude for the beautiful world surrounding her, and for the enigmatic driver and the midnight bus that revealed its wonders to her. The Open-Mouthed Man. Hollow Creek was the name of the village because of where it was situated, deep in the valley, where sunlight had trouble finding. But the name had a different meaning after Silas came along. Silas, the open-mouthed man. One blustery autumn evening he entered Hollow Creek, a gaunt shape draped in a tattered coat. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Silas merely opened his mouth when Mayor Thompson, a tough and practical man, asked his name. Not in a scream, not in a yawn, but in a slow, deliberate, creepy opening. It was a yawning void that swallowed the very atoms of the atmosphere. The villagers shot furtive looks at each other. Silas's mouth, a tight grimace at first, stretched and stretched, the hinges of his jaw apparently thriving on the force of gravity. The opening opened wider than I thought possible and showed a cave dark inside. Mayor Thompson, though pepped up and shaken, controlled a cough. "Right, we'll just give you a call." "Silas." Silas nodded, his mouth snapping closed with a soft, uncomfortable click. He took refuge in the abandoned mill, its walls crumbling on the village outskirts. The miller had perished long ago, leaving nothing but dust and echoes. The villagers, who were initially standoffish, soon started to view Silas as useful. He was unable to speak, but he was capable of listening. And people had always had something to say, even in a small village like Hollow Creek. Tormented by the memory of her lost husband, Widow Albright would sit beside the mill's broken wheel, pouring out her grief to Silas. He would listen, his mouth a suggestion, a line on the canvas of his face. But when she talked about her despair, about the crushing burden of loneliness, his mouth would start to open, slowly, subtly, as if soaking in her sadness. Young Thomas, the blacksmith's son, whose sweet tongue occasionally tied with a stutter that knotted his words into confusion, found sanctuary in Silas's silence. He would tell him all about his dreams of being a traveling musician, his stunted sentences being finished by the silence accompanying Silas. The wider Thomas's mouth grew, the more Silas opened his own, bearing witness to the boy's plight. The villagers learned that Silas's gaping maw was not a threat, but a vessel. He was a breathing sponge, absorbing their anxieties, their fears, their unspeakable desires. He was what you would call a silent confessor, a human vacuum for the emotional detritus that collected in the close-knit community of Hollow Creek. And one day the village was struck by a terrible drought. The well dried up, the crops wilted, the livestock started dying. A panic took hold. Mayor Thompson, now frantic, convened a village meeting. Deflections flew, blame was cast, and despair thickened the air. As usual, Silas lingered on the fringes of the crowd. As the bickering grew and the villagers gave in to acrimonious infighting, his mouth slowly began to open. It yawned wider than it ever had before. It was an immense void, a starlit dark sky shoved into a human face. The villagers fell silent, horrified and enthralled. There was an unnatural energy crackling in the air. Even the ground seemed to shake. And then one raindrop fell. Then another and another. Then came a deluge, filling the well, reviving the crops, washing away the dust and the despair that had settled over the village. They looked at Silas, his mouth now closed, pea-thin, almost invisible line. He looked drained, exhausted. But in his eyes lingered a glint of something they had never witnessed, of a muted accord, of a deep connection. The rain stopped and Hollow Creek breathed its sighs of relief, clean and renewed. The villagers turned to each other, a fresh sense of camaraderie knitting them together. They had confronted their fears, their anxieties, even their own despair, and had been acquitted by the wordless death of the open-mouthed man. Silas stayed in Hollow Creek for a long time. He never spoke. All he did was keep opening his mouth wider and wider, swallowing the plights of the village and allowing them to rise up, lighter and stronger, grateful to the man who had come to Hollow Creek, not to take, but to silently, selflessly take. And in that journey to discover found emptiness, he taught them the true essence of Hollow, a void carved for kindness, empathy, and the unwavering strength of unspoken words. The black fog. Silas, the old lighthouse keeper, had seen much in his 70 years of guarding the craggy Oak Haven coast. Storms that swallowed ships whole, sunrises that turned the sky into colors no artist can replicate, even the occasional mermaid, fueled by rum and loneliness, maybe. But he had never seen anything like the black fog. It wasn't fog as he knew it. This wasn't a moist, mellow embrace that washed in off the ocean, wrapping the world in a blanket of muted quiet. This was malevolent. It was black and oily and moved with a predatory grace that defied the laws of nature. Silas spotted it first on the horizon, a thin smear across the withering embers of sunset. He had dismissed it as just another black cloud until it moved to meet the wind, a shadowy, voracious tide sweeping across the water. He lifted his spyglass, his hand shaking. Whatever it was fast. And it was barreling directly toward Oak Haven. Silas cranked the lighthouse beacon, and the powerful beam sliced the rising dusk. He hoped, prayed any ship stupid enough to be out this late would see the warning. But even as the beam cut through the air, Silas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the sea breeze. He knew, with a certainty that sat like lead in his stomach, that the light wasn't going to stop it. He kicked it open and ran down the spiral staircase, his old bones complaining, his boots thudding the metal steps. He had to warn the village. Oak Haven was small, tucked into a protective cove, a retreat for fishermen and their families. They wouldn't stand a chance. He exploded from the lighthouse doors, salt spray stinging his face. The fog crept closer, a monstrous leviathan on the horizon, swallowing the final light of day. Now he heard it, a low, guttural sound that vibrated in his chest, a sound of pure, unadulterated hunger. Silas ran towards the village, breathing ragged gasps. He banged on doors, screaming warnings, his voice cracking as fear and urgency took hold. The fog. The black fog is coming. Run. Run for your lives. Most dismissed him as a senile old fool. Some peered out from behind draped curtains, their faces furrowed with annoyance. A handful of kids, attracted by the hubbub, stood by the curb, eyes wide. Only old Maggie, the local wise woman, could make sense of it all. She stepped out of her cottage, her expression grim. "It is here," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the wind. "The devourer has awakened." Maggie fought to collect her herbs and amulets, murmuring to herself gently in a dark, guttural language. Like Silas, she knew they were up against something ancient, something beyond human understanding. The fog was upon them now. It rolled into the village like a living shroud, smothering the cries of gulls and the gentle lapping of waves. The people screamed when it struck them, a soundless, mortal scream that the fog's unholy hum immediately swallowed. Houses collapsed, wood and stone turning to dust. Silas horrifically witnessed the world as he knew it, the village he cherished, expunged. He watched as his neighbor young Thomas reached out for his wife, his hand disintegrating in front of him. He watched the church, its steeple taller and prouder for centuries than any building in its town, collapse into a cloud of dust. He knew they were doomed, but he couldn't run. He had to do something. He managed to look back at the lighthouse, the only solid structure remaining against the growling dark. He did it again, burning legs and screaming lungs. He made it to the top, the fog snapping at his heels. He knew what he had to do. Silas picked up a kerosene lamp, its flame just managing to flicker against the encroaching darkness. He raised it like a lighthouse against the devourer. He was old, his life almost over. He was not going to let this thing take Oakhaven without a fight. He twisted the lens from the lighthouse beacon and revealed the giant iridescent bulb encased inside. He smashed the lamp onto the bulb and the kerosene splattered against the glass and a flame leaped into being. In a brilliant flash of light, the lighthouse exploded. Silas felt a wave of heat wash over him, burning his skin but barely felt it. He cast a shadow on the blinding light behind, just a little man standing between the spreading darkness and the light. That light, supercharged as it was on kerosene and the energy of the lighthouse, seemed to thrust back against the fog, making it retreat. For an instant, the village was submerged in a beautiful brightness, shining as a bastion of light amid the looming blackness. Then the light went flickering and fading and out. The fog poured forward, engulfing the lighthouse, consumption, obliteration. But in that brief, glorious moment, Silas had bought them time. A small fishing boat, tucked into a secret cove, had seen the light and slipped away, taking a few survivors with it. They were the last survivors of Oakhaven, the keepers of its secrets, and the image of the black fog and the soul of an old lighthouse keeper who stood resolute against despair and death. And yet they would take the story of Oakhaven with them, a cautionary tale that would be told around campfires, a reminder of the devourer that lay beyond the horizon, asleep but ever vigilant, ready to awaken and consume the world all over again. And they would remember Silas, the light in the darkness, who for an incredible instant had the gall to push back. The bone collector. In the dusty, neglected wing of the hospital, the air was thick and silent. Nurse Anya shivered, drawing her tattered cardigan closer. Night shifts in this place always made her skin crawl. Tonight was especially bad. A power failure had cast her wing in near darkness, with only the pale, flickering light of the emergency lamps to light the long, empty hallways. She was making her rounds, checking the 2 patients still holed up in this facility when she heard it. A soft, staccato clicking sound, dry twigs snapping underfoot. It was from room 312, Mr. Abernathy's room. Anya sucked in a breath, heart clanging against her ribs. Mr. Abernathy was a frail, old man, a skeleton himself already. What on earth could be making that noise? She opened the door tentatively. The room was dim, the single emergency light casting long, dancing shadows. Mr. Abernathy was lying in his bed, perfectly still, his eyes open and blank. He didn't seem to notice her. Then Anya saw it. A shape knelt at the king-sized bed's foot, wrapped in shadow, the outline warped and made fuzzy. It was thin, impossibly thin, nearly skeletal itself. And in its hands, held gently as if they were treasured artifacts, were bones. Small finger bones. Anya felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The click was the sound of the bones coming free. Soaked, scraped, clawed, and pulled from Mr. Abernathy's still living body. The figure appeared not to notice her. It operated with a frigid precision, its long, skinny fingers moving with disturbing grace. It pulled bone after bone, and each click was like a tiny hammer tap on Anya's sanity. She stared, frozen in fear, as the beast neatly towered the little proteins into a rough altar of bedsheets. At last it hit Mr. Abernathy's wrist. She wanted to scream, to flee, only to find herself planted there, locked in a nightmare of her own making. With a last groaning, sickening pop, the ulna and radius were loose. The creature suspended them as if to appreciate its work, and then set them atop the pile. Then its head, if it could be called such, jerked upright. 2 points of red light cut through the gloom and fixed on Anya. There was no way to know whether it was peering at her with malice, curiosity, or some other motive entirely. Fear accomplished what had eluded Anya. It broke her paralysis. She turned and ran, the sound of her footfalls fading down the length of the darkened corridor. She ran, alone and scared, not even realizing where it was she was going. She just knew she had to get away from the horror she had just seen. She ran as if her life depended on it until she reached the nurse's station, panting, mind in a whirl. She stuttered out a description of what she had witnessed to the doctor on duty, a tired resident named Dr. Sharma. Dr. Sharma listened calmly, his face impassive. "Nurse Anya, you've been working so many hours," he said kindly. "It can play tricks on the mind when everything is dark and feels dark. I'll check on Mr. Abernathy." Anya waited, her heart racing. A few minutes later, Dr. Sharma returned, his face grim. "Mr. Abernathy is stable," he said, avoiding a direct answer. "But he's unresponsive. And his hands, they're compromised. Severely. We'll have to do some tests." The subsequent days were a whirlwind of activity. Swarmed with doctors and specialists, the hospital had no idea what was wrong with Mr. Abernathy. X-rays told the truth, he had no bones. Not broken, not disbanded, just vanished. The official cause was a rare form of degeneration of the bones, which his age and underlying health conditions had exaggerated. But Anya knew the truth. She had watched The Bone Collector. She became consumed with a new obsession, researching ancient folklore and forgotten medical texts. She's story of similar legends, tales of the creature who fed on life force of men and women, leaving their victims hollow and empty. She knew she needed to do something, but what? Who would believe her? She is just an exhausted, overworked nurse, glimpsing things in the dark. Then one night, she heard another patient, Mrs. Davison, in room 314, describe a strange tingling sensation in her legs. It was also the same room next to Mr. Abernathy. Anya's blood ran cold. She couldn't let it happen a second time. This time she would be ready. Anya prepared herself with what she had: a crucifix, a vial of holy water, and endearingly, a sharpened bone saw she'd stumbled upon in a long-vanished storage closet. Absurd, she recognized, but she felt she had no choice but to try. That night she sat vigil outside Mrs. Davison's room, her senses heightened. The clicking noise came back, softer this time, barely heard. Taking a deep breath, Anya opened the door. The bone collector had arrived, his emaciated frame crouched over Mrs. Davison's bed, his thin fingers already working on her foot. This time Anya had no qualms. She let out a primal yell of defiance and leaped toward the creature with the bone saw. The bone collector shrank, its red eyes going wide with surprise. It hissed, the sound dry leaves rustling in a graveyard, and turned to Anya. The crucifix was of no use, the holy water did nothing. But as Anya swung the bone saw, driven purely by terror and adrenaline, it hit. The blade met the creature's arm and a small, brittle bone chimed onto the floor. It shrieked, a high, keening wail that filled the hospital wing. It let out a spasm from the hit, its body wavering and inconstant. And then, with a last hissing exhalation of irritation, it was gone, melted into the darkness. Mrs. Davison was rattled but unharmed. Anya had saved her. But she knew the bone collector was out there, somewhere in the dark, waiting for its next meal. Anya left the hospital soon after, refusing to go through another night shift in that haunted place. The bone collector will always stay with her, and the horrors it represents beyond what human comprehension can hold. It will always be out there, waiting for its next meal, preying on the vulnerable, the forgotten. And she knows too that somewhere out there the sound of bone being collected is still haunting a hospital wing. The blood painting. The smell of dust and forgotten things filled the antique shop. Alara, an artist who struggled to make ends meet, found her way through its twisting paths, searching for a muse, or maybe a low-cost surface to paint over. Dust-shrouded windows let in pools of light, illuminating chipped porcelain dolls and tarnished silverware. Then she saw it. The painting was hidden in a dark corner, its canvas stretched tight across an ornate, almost grotesque frame of what appeared to be blackened bone. It was a picture of a landscape, a stark, windswept moor beneath a bruised, purple sky. The palette was subdued, nearly monochrome, except for a lone, vibrant splash of crimson. Fascinated, Ilara bargained with the shopkeeper, a gnarled old man with eyes that appeared to possess centuries' worth of secrets. He didn't want to sell, mumbling about bad luck and things best left forgotten. But Ilara would not give up, and eventually, for a song, the painting was hers. After Ilara returned to her small apartment, she hung the painting over her bed. She studied it, attracted to its bleak beauty. The splash of blood red in the landscape, she decided, was a genius touch, a demand that had to be paid, a jarring element that gave the piece a raw, visceral power. That night she went to sleep with the image of the moor in her brain. She woke with a start. The room was engulfed in the pale light of the moon. Something was wrong. There was a palpable heaviness in the air, an electrifying disturbance. Ilara looked at the painting. It had changed. The landscape remained, the moor expanded in front of you, and only the splash of red had increased. It was bigger, broader, and it wasn't just a splash anymore. Now it had shaped a figure, a crude, abstract likeness of a human being, prostrate on the moor. Ilara shuddered. It had to be a trick of the light, she told herself. A disturbing coincidence. She made herself close her eyes, to block out the creeping dread that was opening like a flower in her chest. The following day, Ilara attempted to reason with herself. The events of the night prior were simply a very vivid nightmare. But the picture of the painting stayed with her. And so she went to work, sketching wildly, as if to capture the beautiful horror she had beheld. But nothing she made could hold a candle to the painting. She girded herself that night. She lit every light in her apartment, trying to reflect off whatever bizarre energy the art was giving out. But as darkness fell and the moon rose higher, the picture began to change again. The figure in the pose was clearer now, more distinct. It even seemed to have hair. Its color was the same as Ilara's, a dark raven black. Panic started to scratch at her throat. She couldn't sleep, and she was like a lock, watching the painting with a wakeful silence. A scream was being held in. The days that followed were a blur of sleeplessness and escalating terror. Each night the painting was chunkier, the figure on the moor more and more like herself. She saw the curve of her neck, the shape of her hands, the fall of her hair across her face. How she had died became gruesomely evident, a jagged, blood-red gash across her throat. Ilara tried everything. She prayed. She burned sage. She Googled obscure rituals. But nothing worked. The painting instead morphed into something macabre, a nightly portent of her future demise. In a panic, she returned to the antique shop. The old man watched as she approached, a knowing glimmer in his eye. "You've returned," he said, his voice the quandary of dry leaves. "I told you it was bad luck. What is it?" "Please," Ilara said, her voice quivering. "What is that painting?" He let out a long, weary sigh. "It's titled The Blood Painting. Legend has it that it displays the death of whoever possesses it. Every night the painting reveals the truth. Is there anything I can do?" The old man shook his head, his face filled with sorrow. "Some things are bound to happen, child. Some fates are sealed." Ilara's heart sank. She went back to her apartment, beaten. That night she did not fight it at all. She sat in front of the painting, waiting for the ultimate, horrifying evolution. When the moon was at its highest point, the painting became clear, painfully clear. She was lying there on the moor, throat cut, blood blooming like a dark flower. But something was wrong. The figure in the painting was not on the moor. It was standing, and it was staring right at her. Ilara caught her breath, her eyes screaming. The woman in the painting, the now perfect copy of herself, raised a hand, fingers stained with red. It reached out toward the edge of the canvas and stepped out. The form slipped across the floor with a disquieting poise, its gaze unfeeling and empty. Its bloodied hand lifted, and Ilara recognized the glint of metal, a shard of glass, spoon from the picture frame. In one smooth, savage motion, the figure sliced Wendell's throat. The pain was intense, excruciating, blinding. Ilara staggered, hands clutching her neck, blood pouring out from between her fingers. She collapsed onto the floor, her sight growing dimmer and dimmer, her breath rasping in her chest. As darkness descended, she witnessed her own form, a terrifying, soulless mask, stepping back inside the painting. Malformed by blades of wind and time, the figure in red upon the moor was replaced with Ilara herself, still as stone. The cycle was complete. The blood painting was silent on the wall, its colors low, its surface slick. And the antique shop again carried a secret best buried: the death coin. The antique shop was a cathedral of abandoned things. Dust motes danced in the pale sunlight that trickled through the filthy windows, exposing gaping porcelain dolls, tarnished silverware and stacks of yellowed books that smelled of decay. Elias, a man who has stood for too long on the edges of economic disaster, still got the push, the hope, sharp as a moth in the must of air. He had heard things, rumors about Old Man Hemlock's shop, that there were all manner of cursed objects, that there were relics of power. Most he discounted as folklore. Tonight, desperation turned him into a believer. He needed a miracle. Old Man Hemlock, a stooped man whose eyes glittered like buried treasure, appeared from the dark depths. "Are you looking for anything in particular, young man?" he rasped, his voice like the dry leaves. Elias has swallowed, his eyes gluing on a petite velvet-lined box perched on the top shelf. "Oh, I heard you might have something that's unusual." Hemlock's eyes followed his, a knowing smile dancing at the corners of his mouth. "Unusual? My boy, there is nothing in here that is not odd. But you refer to the death coin, do you not?" A shiver coursed down Elias's spine. He hadn't mentioned it. Why the death coin? Hemlock did not make a sudden movement. There was an air of slow, careful deliberation as he reached slowly for the box. Inside, resting on a tattered piece of crimson silk, were a coin of blackened silver. Intricate, unsettling runes spiraled around its surface. It radiated a dim, near-invisible heat. "This," Hemlock said in a low, murmuring voice, "is the death coin. The legend is that it grants unthinkable wealth, provider of all your financial needs. But there's a price." Elias knew there had to be. Nothing came without a cost. "What price?" "Your life," Hemlock said, eyes fixing on Elias's. "For every financial wish granted, your life is shortened. A day or a week or a month, maybe a year. The coin decides. And the more extravagant the wish, the price." Elias hesitated. He was already leading a life of quiet desperation. What was a year or two if it meant avoiding the life-ruining burden of debt, of supporting his family? How does it work?" he asked, his voice low. "Hold the coin. Focus on your desire. Awaken the power within you and feel it coursing through. And then, let it go. The wish will be granted. And the price will be paid." But Elias picked up the coin against his better judgment. As his fingers grazed the icy silver, a shockwave surged through him. Out visions poured into his head. Wife smiling, not worried, kids in elite schools, mansion overlooking the ocean. He sat and closed his eyes, envisioning the mountain of debt looming above him like a massive wave waiting to crash down and consume him whole. He wanted it gone. He wanted financial freedom. He let go. The coin dropped back into the velvet box. He felt a strange lightness, a feeling of liberation, but also a transient pang in his chest, a kind of emptiness. "Done," said Hemlock, his voice ringing in the quiet shop. "Your wish is granted, and the price is paid." Elias stepped out of the shop, dusted and lost things hanging on his clothes. Arriving at his crumbling apartment, he prepared for another sleepless night grappling with bills. Then came the knock on the door, followed by the sight of it, a letter from the bank saying that, miraculously, his debt had been cleared. Some wealthy stranger had covered it all. Overcome with relief, he ran to his wife, wrapping her in an embrace as tears flowed down his face. He had done it. He had saved them. Days turned into weeks. Elias's life transformed. Money appeared to arrive to him easily. He found a new high-paying job, his investments blossomed, and his family experienced an unprecedented level of comfort. A mansion looking over the ocean came to be. But the pain in his chest returned and grew more frequent. He noticed he learned easily, catching his breath after the slightest exertion. His doctor could find nothing wrong, chalking it up to stress and anxiety. Elias knew better. He recognized it as the death coin. He attempted to forget it, to luxuriate in his new riches, but the awareness ate at him. He was living a borrowed life, a life purchased with years cut from his future. One evening, sitting on the balcony of his ocean view mansion and gazing at the sun disappearing on the horizon, Elias noticed his own mistake. He had been so fixated on getting rid of his debt that he hadn't thought about what it would cost him. He had squandered precious time with his family, years of laughter shared with his children, for material goods. As the last sliver of the sun sank, a sharp pain racked his chest. He pitched forward, one hand gripping the railing. His wife rushed to his side, fear etched on her face. His eyes brimmed with regret as he looked down at her. The coin, he could hardly say. The death coin. His wife did not understand it, but as she pulled him close, she felt a familiar coldness, a chill that seemed to come from his essence. Somehow she also knew that whatever had given them this life had taken it away. Elias passed away that evening, the hallmarks of his success, symbols that had transformed into hollow, empty trophies, all around him. He had grown rich but purchased his undoing. The death coin had, indeed, delivered on its promise, a macabre reminder of the old saying, "Be careful what you wish for, it just might happen." And sometimes it's a cost far too high to bear. The eyeless stalker. The villagers of Oak Haven existed in a perpetual, creeping dread, a terror so deep it had drained the color from their cheeks. They had a name for their fear, the eyeless stalker. It was said to be a creature of darkness, of whispers, a predator drawn from the obscured woods, a curse laying to waste anything with the audacity to glimpse its form. Old Maggie, the village seer, had been the first to spot it. One twilight evening, coming back from foraging some herbs, she screamed, a noise that shattered the stillness of the woods. When the villagers found her, hovering in a corner, her thoughts rambling and incoherent, she was scratching at her own eyes, raving voice a broken whisper, "Blind, you must be blind. It sees you, it sees you." Maggie died that night, eyes open and dead, all life gone from them. The villagers, who were already steeped in the lore of the eyeless stalker, understood. They knew the rules. The stalker was imperceptible to those who were not already aware of it. Once you locked eyes with it, though, you were branded. It would hunt you doggedly, soundlessly, until it took you. And the only defense was a failure to see, voluntary or otherwise. Oak Haven sank into darkness. Windows were boarded. Shutters were nailed shut. They walked with their heads down, feeling their way through the familiar streets. The blacksmith burned his own eyes out with a hot poker, screaming as he accepted blindness rather than look upon the stalker. More followed, the air charged with the stench of roasting skin and screaming agony. Young Elara, however, said no. She remembered the tales her grandmother had told her, tales which painted the stalker not as a fiendish beast but as a fierce protector, keeping the woods safe from man. She knew that the legend also said there was a way to appease it. While the others shut their eyes in panic-stricken despair, Elara explored the dusty old texts, feeling her heart beat against her ribs. The stalker, she learned, was said to target those who harbored greed in their hearts, those who harvested the forest's bounty without regard. She had also discovered a piece of the ritual, a way to give a gift to the stalker, a gift of apology and thankfulness to the balance of the world. This would take them deep into the heart of the Whispering Woods, a site no villager had ever been brave enough to enter. On a night without a moon, Elara, her eyes wide and unafraid, slipped from Oak Haven. In one hand she bore a basket spun from the reeds of the river, in the other, woven in her palm, was the most precious of each villager's belongings. A lock of hair from a beloved, a pockmarked clay pipe, a blackened silver copper. She hoped the stalker would accept these sacrifices and recognize their humility. The Whispering Woods were true to its name. Wind murmured like rustling pages of the past through the ancient trees, as if the forest itself followed Elara with a million eyes. She had the sensation of someone standing behind her, an iciness in the atmosphere that set her hair on end. She came to a clearing lit by an unnatural moonlight. In the middle was an old oak, branches curled and gnarly like fingers from beyond the grave. This was the place. Ilara set the basket down against the oak and spoke, her voice shaking but strong. I bring gifts from the people of Oakhaven. We have erred. We have taken too much from the forest and have not returned enough. We know what we've done wrong, and here are these small gifts of our accountability. Silence. There was an air of heaviness, an almost palpable static. Heart pounding, Ilara waited, fear threatening to engulf her. Then she felt it. An ancient and powerful presence formed before her. It was no clearer to hear than a broken distortion in the air as light and shadow played about what seemed like a formless form. It was frightening, and yet Ilara wouldn't look away. It lingered in each room, scrutinizing the offerings with a focus that was almost a physical force. Then it spoke, a voice spoken not in the air but in her mind, a voice that sang with the marrow of the forest. They see but do not understand. They are afraid but they do not respect. Ilara bowed her head. We understand now. Teach us to see again, to comprehend, to honor. For a long moment the presence was silent. Then it spoke again, its voice softening a little. The forest remembers. Let them learn to memorize with it. And then as quickly as it came, it was gone, and all that remained was the sound of wind in the trees. She returned to Oakhaven, visions of the unseen stalker occupying her mind. She explained to the villagers what had happened. Gradually, tentatively, they started to open their shutters, to allow the light back into their lives. But for the forest, they did so with a respect they hadn't once had. They replanted trees, nurtured the underbrush, and learned to cohabitate with nature. The eyeless stalker never preyed on anyone from Oakhaven again. It made them look beneath the divide, to feel the precariousness of this world full of crude balance. They discovered that true blindness isn't a physiological condition but rather a blindness of the heart. And they knew that at times, the most powerful dangers are not the ones we can observe, but the ones we choose not to accept. Ilara grew to be a leader, guiding her people well, never forgetting the night she stood up to the eyeless stalker and taught her village how to really see. The Forgotten Song. Dust motes danced in the single beam of sunlight cutting through the oppressive gloom of the antiquarian's annex. Elias, a man more at ease with rustling parchment than garrulous men, coughed and fiddled with his glasses. He had hunted for weeks, following a rumor carried by the wind, a rumor of a song. Ink-stained, aged fingers traced the spines of bound leather volumes. The Forgotten Song, they titled it. A song that, once listened, never gets unheard, and transformed the audience. Most dismissed it as a fanciful story, a romantic invention. But Elias, a man tormented by the relentlessness of sameness, wanted desperately to believe. Finally, behind a crumbling grimoire, there it was. Not a book as he had expected, but a small wooden flute ornately carved. It was of an unfamiliar wood that was close to black and oddly warm under his touch. Faintly glowing, etched into the side like a cryptic heartbeat. He held his breath. This was it. This was the song. Reluctantly, he raised the flute to his mouth. It felt like years since he played an instrument, not since his grandmother, but the memory faded as a frantic anticipation took hold. He blew. The sound that came out was not what he anticipated. It wasn't a tune, not in the usual way. It was a raw, primal wail echoing in the bones. It was the sound of wind moaning through a no-man's land, of waves slamming into primordial rock, of the soil crying out under all those eons of pressure. It was a song of creation and destruction, of birth and death, that went past the ears like a song that went straight into the soul. He kept playing as if by some unseen force. The annex seemed to dissolve, and in its place, swirling colors, visions flying across his eyelids. He witnessed empires flourish and fall, stars explode and extinguish, the eternal ballet of the cosmos. Then, abruptly as it had begun, it ended. Elias trembled as the flute slipped from his fingers, clattering to the dusty floor. The annex was quiet once more, the sun still shining through the window. But he was not the same. The world was sharper, more clear. It was a rolling tribal nomad with mercury and ebony hues, and he could see the delicate patterns sewn in on it, the grain of the dust motes in the light, the spider spinning in the corner. He placed his hands against the Baptist and felt the weight of the centuries contained here, the echoes of countless lives lived out behind these walls. He attempted to hum a well-known tune, a simple nursery rhyme. But the melody caught, twisted, warped, and broke into pieces of the forgotten song. He understood what they meant by unheard. His memory of the song was not the way we experience memory now. It was as though the song existed in a different time where time had not yet eroded the song into faded suffering. The shift has not been all that pleasant. He was overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of existence, by knowledge of beauty and suffering intertwined. The daily routine that had once filled his days felt banal, meaningless. He dealt with the burden of it all, the sensation of being part of everything, of everyone, in ways that he couldn't understand. But there was also deep awe as well. He beheld the oneness of all things, the harmony that bound the cosmos together. He had never been so empathetic, never so human. His fingers traced the slick surface of the flute, which he picked up. He knew he could not bring himself to play it again, at least not without losing himself completely. But he could not destroy it either. He knew it was a part of the man now, always a reminder of the unexplored and unfathomable that lives below the realm of normalcy. Elias went back to his life, but it was another life. And so he delved into his books with renewed vigor, determined to glean the secrets that lay between the notes of the forgotten song. He treated his fellow humans with kindness and compassion because he understood the burden of existence shared by all. Never did he mention the flute or the song. Some things were too sacred, too intimate to share. But the song was the song, and it was one he had never stopped singing, one he would not cease to sing. He was no longer merely Elias, the earnest antiquarian. He was Elias, the guardian of the forgotten song, a song that had altered him for eternity. And as heavy as the weight of that song was, he wore it with a newfound perspective, quiet strength, eyes reflecting the endless dance of the universe, the music, the song that could never really be silenced ever again. He was, after all, in on it now. The ghost in the phone. Rain pounded on Amelia's window, matching the frantic rhythm of her heart. It was a dumb dare, she knew. A juvenile contest powered by cheap beer and a waning internet signal well into the night. But the thrill of the forbidden, the sharp icicle of urban legend, had proved too enticing to suppress. "Come on, you going to do it or not, Amelia?" Liam had laughed, his face lit by the laptop screen. The others, Chloe and Ben, had snickered, halfway convinced already that she wouldn't. It had been luridly described on a website, a dark corner of the dark web devoted to cursed numbers and whispered stories. "Call this number," it said, and a voice would pick up. Not a human voice, something else. That would etch itself onto your soul and ensure your death 24 hours later. "It's just a number, guys," she'd mumbled, hoping to sound braver than she felt. Now, sitting in bed after sending everyone else home, the phone sat heavy in her palm. The number seared into her memory like a scar, teamed with some otherworldly power. 555666000. She felt a lurch, a shiver snaking down her spine. She could still back out. Forget the number, act like it never existed. All you can blame is too much tequila lime. But the thought of Liam's cocky smirk and Chloe and Ben's taunting whispers kept her frozen. Taking a deep breath, she entered the digits. It felt as if the dial tone stretched forever, each ring a tiny, painful eternity. Finally, a click. Someone answered, but it was not someone she recognized. It was a low, guttural rasp, like dry leaves skittering against pavement. It was not words, only a sound like fingernails scraping the inside of her skull. It boomed in her depths, a sticky discord that made her teeth throb. Panic clenched her throat. She hung up with a slap of the receiver, her hand trembling violently. All right," she whispered, attempting to reassert herself. "It's just a recording. Probably some prank." But with each passing hour, doubt ate at her. She was unable to shake off the overwhelming dread, the sensation of being watched. Every shadow seemed to grow longer, every creak of the house magnified into an evil whisper. She attempted to occupy her mind. Watched mindless television, flicked through social media, whatever she could do to banish the picture of that number, that noise, from her mind. But it was no use. The curse, whether tangible or phantom, had settled in. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, the same weight sitting on her chest. She woke suddenly, the cold whisper ringing in her ears. The clock showed 8 a.m. Only 16 hours left. She confided in no one. Her fear of sounding insane and shame at having been his fool kept her from speaking. Instead, she spent the day tumbling in a frenzy, trying to compress a lifetime into a few blessed hours. She phoned her parents, saying that she loved them. She reread her favorite book, familiar words and almost microscopic comfort in the approaching darkness. She even went for a walk outside, through the park, trying to make herself see beauty in the world. A feeling of doom hung heavily in the air as the sun started to fall. The world slowed down, the air growing heavy around her like a shroud. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that her time was running out. Back in their apartment, she sat on her bed, eyes fixed on the clock. 11:50 p.m. 10 minutes. She closed her eyes, prepared to surrender to her fate. Perhaps the stars did not align for the Matrix. Maybe this was all a hoax. But the fear was too visceral, too real. Then a thought struck her. She picked up her phone, trembling fingers. She went to her contacts and called Liam's number. When we finally got through, he answered on the second ring, voice groggy. "Amelia? What's up?" "Liam," she said, barely above a whisper. "I need you to do me a favor." She rattled off the number, 555666000. "What is that?" he said, his voice tinged with confusion. Just call it," she said, voice cracking. "Please, Liam, just call it." A moment, he paused before continuing, the sigh. "Fine, whatever. I'll call it. But you owe me big time." She was off the phone, her heart pounding in her chest. The clock ticked down. 11:58 p.m. She sucked in her breath, preparing for the worst. Then a knock on the door. Confused, she opened it. Liam remained, his face pale and drawn. "Amelia," he said, his voice shaking. "And what the hell was that number? Did you dial it?" she said in a barely audible voice. He nodded, his eyes opened wide with terror. "Yeah, I dialed it. Some creepy sounds, like nails on a chalkboard. What is going on?" The clock struck midnight. Nothing happened. A wave of relief flooded over Amelia, so strong it nearly swept her off her feet. She had escaped death, not by breaking the curse, but by transmitting it. A horrible, selfish act, but she was alive. She stared at Liam, his expression a blend of fear and confusion. Remorse curled in her belly, but the overwhelming tide of survival washed it away. "Liam," she managed to say, tears running down her face. I'm so sorry." He stared back, eyes filled with betrayal and dawning comprehension. The rain poured relentlessly outside the window, a grieving song for the spirit in the phone, a spirit that suddenly had a new shell to call home. And Amelia, barely hanging on by the flimsiest string, knew she would never be free. That number, that sound, that curse, would always play through her mind, the chilling reminder of the night she chose to live at another's expense. And worst of all, she knew that somewhere, buried in dark corners of the internet, the game would go on. The number would be passed along, and the cycle of fear and death would start all over again. The hollow ones. Rain beat against the diner's windows like the pulse galloping in Clara's chest. On the other side of the cracked vinyl booth, her date, Mark, was laughing, his head tossed back, his eyes sparkling under the neon glow of the open 24 hours sign. He appeared completely normal, even charming. Except, Clara swallowed. The slice of apple pie abruptly tasted of sawdust. She tried to ignore it, attribute it to the bad lighting, but she couldn't anymore. Mark's eyes were usually a warm hazel, but now were hollow. Deep, dark abscesses consumed by shadows. Nothing reflected in them but an unsettling void. She had heard the whispers, of course. The hollow ones. People who were you and me, but who were missing something important, some essence snuffed out. They walked among us, unremarkable at a glance, until you looked into their eyes. Then you knew. Something wrong, Clara? "Mark," he said, his voice a smooth baritone. His laughter trailed off and the abrupt quiet heightened the constant rain. His gaze fixed on her. It was sort of looking into the abyss. She flinched. "Just tired? Long day." He smiled, a practiced, disturbing smile that never got to his eyes. Of course, me too. Let me drive you home. Her blood ran cold with fear. The Hollow Ones weren't known for violence, not really. They just changed you. They took something out of you and now you echo hollow inside just like them. Actually, she stammered, I think I left something in my car. I'll just pick up and walk home. It's not far. He inclined his head, looking her over. His eyes have grown savagely hollow as if he could see inside her. It's pouring rain, Clara. Don't be silly. No. She pushed herself up, nearly spilling her coffee. I need the exercise. She almost ran out of the diner, the cold rain slicking her hair to her face. She risked a glance back. Mark stood in the doorway, watching her from the shadows. His eyes, even from so far away, were unmistakable. She didn't stop running until she got to her apartment building. The door flew open, the keys jangling in her hand. She moose-kicked the door shut. She pressed herself against the cool metal, trying to catch her breath. She'd seen one. She'd gone out with one. And now he knew she knew. Clara spent days in heightened paranoia. She steered clear of places she and Mark had discussed, flinched at every unexpected sound. She noticed hollow ones everywhere. The vacant-eyed cashier at the grocery store, the blank-faced man waiting at the bus stop. Or perhaps she was simply imagining it. Perhaps fear had distorted her perspective. Then one evening she discovered a single perfect crimson rose on her doorstep. No card, no note, just the rose, and a deep sense of dread. She called Sarah, her best friend, needing reassurance. I think they're watching me, Sarah. I saw him again. He left a rose. It sounds romantic, but it's terrifying. Sarah's voice was calm. Clara, you're taking this too personally. Perhaps it was simply a coincidence. Maybe the rose had been left by someone else. No, Sarah, you don't get it. You have to see his eyes. It's... Sarah interrupted. Listen, I'm coming over. We are going to watch a movie, we are going to get junk food, and we are going to forget about all of this. Clara hesitated. Are you sure? Absolutely. See you in an hour. Relief washed over Clara. Sarah would help her to see reason. She brewed tea in an attempt to quell her nerves. She dashed to the door when the doorbell rang. When she got to Zmurray and Dory, it was Sarah. But something was wrong. She had a blank, almost vacant look on her face. And when she looked at Clara, her eyes, they were dead. Sarah? His voice was low. Clara barely caught his words. Sarah smiled, her lips twitching. Don't be afraid, Clara. We just want you to be like us. Clara's blood ran cold. She tried to slam shut the door, but it was too late. The darkness had already begun to infiltrate. She could feel an emptiness forming inside her, usurping her fear. She knew what was coming. She knew she was about to become one of them. Looking at her reflection in the darkened window, she noted how the shadows had begun to lengthen around her eyes. The rain kept pouring down, erasing the last remnants of who she had once been. Soon she would be no different than anyone else in the pews, standing, waiting, except for the hollowness inside her. The hollow ones were increasing in numbers. And now Clara was one of them. The metamorphosis had been accomplished. The only question now was, who was she bringing into the fold next? The house that moves. They talked stories, Maeve the old woman. Stories that were whispered like secrets, that tasted of mothballs and fear. The one that stuck to my ribs, the one that I couldn't get out of my head at night, was about the house that moves. It seemed banal, a plain Victorian with peeling blue paint and a porch swing that creaked on still days. But it never stayed put. Then one afternoon it would be on Elm Street, the next it would be gone without warning, leaving behind only churned earth and the ghost of laughter. Maeve said the first known disappearance was in the 1920s. The house and a young couple, the Millers, fresh to town, had disappeared. No warning, no screaming, just emptiness. Volatility and chillingly random. Over the decades, the disappearances continued. A solitary widower, a family of 4, a bunch of college kids on a dare. Gone, devoured by the house that moves. Naturally, some people dismissed it as folklore, a haunting story to scare kids. But Maeve, her eyes shards of obsidian, swore it was real. It hurts, she'd rasp, her voice crackling like dried leaves. It craves something, someone. I was a skeptic, a cynic. I was used to being a reporter searching for a story. The story of the house that moves was too fascinating to resist. I began researching, combing through old newspaper archives, interviewing whomever I could find who remembered Maeve's stories. I discovered references to the disappearances, which were dismissed as likely runaways or tragic accidents. But the common thread, the echo of a blue Victorian, started to prick at my skin. Then it happened. The Hendricks family. A young couple, Sarah and David, and their 6-year-old daughter, Lily. They purchased a ramshackle Victorian on the far side of town, a project house with endless potential. The local paper said they were last seen a week ago. The police were looking, but the investigation was stalled. I drove out to the Hendricks property, my heart racing a clamorous tempo in my chest. What I found was nothing. Nothing but an area of churned-up dirt, the gnarled, exposed roots of what appeared to be a newly unearthed tree. That was what Maeve described perfectly. Fear, cold and gnawing, slithered up my spine. Could the legend be true? So I began to pore over old maps, topographical surveys, anything that might reveal a pattern, a clue. Days melted into nights propelled by coffee and paranoia. Finally I found it. A quiet pattern, a soft triangulation. The house that moves appeared in places that made a rough, ragged triangle, as if it were circumnavigating something. And in the middle of that triangle, Blackwood Manor on the outskirts of town. Equipped with this information, I set out for Blackwood Manor. The smell of rot and wet ground hung heavy in the air. As I made my way through the overgrown grounds, brambles clawed at my clothes. The manor stood a skeletal wreck, its windows blind eyes open to the void. Felt wrong. Then I saw it. Beyond the manor, under the contortions of ancient oak trees, was a square of violated earth, identical to the one where the Hendricks house had been. And alongside it, obscured by thick underbrush, what was left of pale blue paint. The house that moves. Adrenaline surged through me. I stepped in closer, my hand shaking as I parted the last of the branches. The porch swing, as Maeve described, squeaked gently in the silence. There was nothing on the surface to suggest trouble, the windows dark and alluring. I knew, with a cold certainty that sent a shiver down my spine, the Hendricks were inside. I took a deep breath and walked outside onto the porch to ring the doorbell. Only the creaking of the swing disturbed the silence. Then the door creaked, slowly, quietly open. It was Lily, the Hendricks' 6-year-old daughter, standing framed in the doorway. Her face was pale and her eyes were wide and vacant. She did not appear to recognize me. "Lily," I said, my voice filled with emotion. "Where are your parents?" She cocked her head, her eyes leaving focus. "They're changing," she said, her voice a monotone whisper. "The house is changing them." Before I could demand what she meant, a shape appeared in the shadows behind her. It turns out it was David, Sarah's husband. But he was different. His eyes glassy, his movements twitchy, his skin pale and translucent, as if he was becoming part of the house itself. He reached for me, his hand was cold and clammy. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered, his tone hollow, distant. "The house needs to be fed." Panic seized me. We fell back, fleeing the porch, fleeing Lily, fleeing the monstrous caricature of David. I sprinted past the corner, not stopping until I got to my car. I looked back. The house still stood, wedged between the trees and sharing her view, painted blue, glowing tentatively in the dusk. Was watching me. I drove away with the vision of Lily's vacant eyes and David's specter stained on my retinas. I knew I wouldn't go to the police. They wouldn't believe me. Now I'm on the run. The house is still out there roaming, hunting. I don't know what it wants, what it's turning people into. But I know I can't let it take anyone else. I have to figure out how to stop the house that moves, how to end its cycle of hunger. No matter the cost, even if it's everything. Because I know with frightening certainty that if I don't, the house will come for me. The living tattoo. The rain beat against the window of the tattoo parlor, reflecting the storm raging within Elias. He always liked to think of himself as a canvas, a living gallery of his life, an ink kraken on his back, an ink phoenix on his chest, each vibrant memory painted forever into his skin. But he wanted more. You wanted something alive. This is how he ended up at Ink and Whispers, a seedy, back-alley establishment said to traffic in the supernatural. She was an artist named Serafina, and her eyes glimmered like molten gold as she played coy and listened to his desires with a knowing smirk. You are searching for the Viviscript. Her voice was a low hum, a living tattoo. Not for the faint of heart, we warn you. It will communicate. Elias swallowed, the forbidden thrill outweighing his trepidation. He selected one winding vine of ivy to snake about his left arm. Serafina produced a needle that resembled an artifact from a time long past, as well as an ink sparkling like emerald in color. It was excruciating, a freezing hotness that sank to the bone. As she concluded, the ivy appeared to twitch, the tiny leaves trembling. The Viviscript was a wonder, at least the first few weeks. He'd see it stretch out and curl and the leaves open gradually. He took it round to everyone, reveling in their awe. Then the whisper started. Initially, it was an undetectable rustling like wind through leaves. He brushed it off as imagination, the heat of the heavy tattooing. Yet the rustling switched into low whisperings, never quite above the edge of distinction. They arrived at strange hours, in meetings or the stillness of his apartment or sending him to sleep. The murmurs became crisper, more urgent. They felt fragmented, unsettling. Watch him, don't trust. The book? Elias grew paranoid. He became paranoid about his friends, his colleagues, even his own brother. The whispers were preying on his insecurities, magnifying his anxieties. He began to view the vine as an entity apart from himself, a parasite that thrived on his misgivings. He tried to ignore it, tried to drown out the whispers with music, with noise, with alcohol. But the Viviscript brooked no quarter. One night, the whispers resolved into a complete, sibilant sentence, crisp and bright, into his ear. He knows about the book. He wants it. Elias froze. The book? He whispered back, choking with fear. The vine contracted around his arm, the leaves pressing against his skin. Your brother. He's lying to you. Elias ran toward his brother, Mark, panic choking in his throat. He faced him down over the book, a ratty tome that their grandfather had bequeathed them, crammed with arcana and scrawled notes. Mark paled. I was going to tell you, Mark stammered, but someone gave me very good money for it. I needed it, Elias. I'm in debt. A wave of betrayal washed over Elias. The Viviscript had been correct. He'd always had a competitive undercurrent with Mark, but he never suspected his brother would betray him in this way. He sprinted back to Ink and Whispers, eager now to remove the ink. Serafina gave him an understanding look. The Viviscript has done its job, I see. Get it off me. Elias pleaded. It's driving me crazy. It's ruining my life. Serafina shook her head. I cannot simply remove it. The link is too deep, but I can show you how to rein it in. She described the Viviscript as an amplifier, not a creator of his own intuition. It went to the subconscious, the invisible truths he already knew but had actively ignored. The whispers were not due to badness. They were a way to remind himself of his own insecurities. You need to learn to distinguish the signal from the noise, she said. To hear not only the whispers but your own heart. Serafina gifts Elias a tiny silver amulet. Wear this. It will help you sift the whispers, to see them not as commands but warnings. For the next few months, Elias learned how to live with the Viviscript. The amulet helped. He learned to concentrate on the central message, to block out the fear and paranoia of the tattoo adding to that mantra. He began listening to his instincts, to the whispers, not following them blindly but instead treating them as a guide, a heads-up. The vine remained an ever-present reminder of the chaos within him, twisting and curling around his arm. But now, when it whispered, it wasn't with malice, but with a pearl of strange, uncertain wisdom. It wasn't governing him, it was guiding him through the intricacies of his life. On a rainy evening, Elias gazed down at the ivy vine, smile warm on his lips. Thank you, he whispered. The vine brushed lightly over his skin, and for the first time, the silence that followed wasn't deafening. It was peaceful. He was learning finally to listen, not merely to the living tattoo on his arm but to the wee voice in himself. The viviscript that had tortured him had become a tutor, a davy maker, a close, near-perfect mirror of his own burgeoning mind. The whispering doll. It had the dusty smell of an antique shop. Sarah loved it. Sunlight streamed through dusty windows, revealing chipped porcelain dolls and tarnished silver tea sets. She gravitated, as always, toward the doll corner. There, among the jumble of teddy bears with missing eyes, she spotted her. It was a porcelain doll with a delicate, hand-painted face and wide, unsettlingly blue eyes. She wore a faded velvet dress the color of dried blood, and her hair, a waterfall of golden curls, was surprisingly soft. She whispered secrets in shape. Sarah picked her up. "She's a little weird," the shop owner, Mr. Abernathy, said, his voice a low rumble. "Been here for years. No one wants her. They say she whispers." He laughed, a hollow, disquieting sound. Superstition, of course. Sarah didn't believe in superstition, but she had felt a strange little chill go down her back. Disregarding her gut, she purchased the doll for a song and christened her Clara. That night, resting on her bedside table, Clara appeared to look at Sarah with an unsettling intensity. She shrugged it off as her imagination, kindled by Mr. Abernathy's comments. She clicked off the light and fell asleep. Then she heard it, a soft, virtually imperceptible whisper. And at first she thought it was the wind, but it was for sure coming from the direction of the doll. "Play with me," the whisper seemed to say. Sarah bolted up in bed, heart racing. She scrambled for the lamp, filling the room with light. Clara said and sat in silence, her blue eyes alight but unreadable. Sarah told herself it was a dream, a delirium of the mind. She switched off the light and attempted to sleep, but felt as if someone was observing her. The following night, the whispering was louder, clearer. "Comb my hair," it pleaded. This time Sarah didn't brush it off. A cold, sharp fear cut through her skepticism. She took a little brush and, trembling, stroked Clara's golden tresses. The hair felt undeniably real, not stiff synthetic strands like other dolls. The next night, the pattern repeated. The whispers grew more demanding, more specific. "Tell me a story, sing me a song, hold my hand." Clara seemed a bit more alive. Her skin became warmer to the touch, the color in her cheeks increased, and there was an intelligence in her eyes. Sarah, filled with terror and morbid fascination, did. She was moved to make Clara's requests happen, driven by some compelling force. She read her fairy tales and sang her lullabies and held her hand until her fingers hurt. She began losing sleep, not doing her work, and withdrawing from friends. Clara didn't whisper one night. Instead she spoke. "Thank you, Sarah," said the doll, her voice soft and childlike, a pleasant lilt. "You have been very kind." Sarah screamed, dropping the doll on the ground. Clara touched down with a gentle thump, her porcelain limbs curiously rubbery. She sat up, her blue eyes glimmering with true emotion now. "I was stuck," Clara told me, and there was a painful lilt to her voice. "Bound to this form. You have brought me back to life." Sarah could only gaze, dumbfounded. Clara rose, her velvet dress glistening with an otherworldly shine. Now she was the way real children look like, a rosy-cheeked 6-year-old with a glimmer of mischief in her eye. "Do not be afraid," Clara said as she grasped Sarah's hand. "I won't hurt you. I want to help you." She told Clara that she had once been an actual girl and had been trapped in this doll long ago by a jealous sorcerer. Someone with a kind heart had been freestanding her. In the following weeks, Sarah and Clara became inseparable. Clara ceased to be a mute doll and laughed and danced. You helped Sarah at her work, picked her up when she was down, and even gave her some good advice. Clara in turn learned the modern world from Sarah, sharing books, music, and stories. One day Clara grew pensive. "I can't live here forever, Sarah," she said low, vain. "I need to move on." Sarah's heart sank. "Where will you go?" she said, her voice so quiet that I could hardly hear her. Clara smiled gently. "Back to where I belong. But I will never forget you, Sarah. You set me free." That night, while Sarah slept, Clara kissed her forehead. Sarah woke up and Clara was gone. Its dullness returned, though its senselessness remained, a porcelain being with cold, faded blue eyes. Sarah missed Clara dearly, but she knew she did the right thing. She had released a prisoner of the soul, and in the doing hadn't known it but had discovered a companion she would hold to her forever. Only now it contained one cherished bittersweet memory. And to this day, whenever the wind howled outside her window, Sarah still thought she could hear, now and then, a faint whisper, a gentle echo of a girl named Clara saying thank you. The smiling beast. The forest held its breath. Not even the chatter of the normally bushy-tailed critters filled the air. They were unusually timid, sensing the foreboding that suffused the atmosphere. Ilara, a girl with moss-green eyes and hair like spun moonlight, tightened her hold on her father's knotted axe. He had gone missing 2 days earlier when he left to hunt a stag in the woods. Now, Ilara traced the thin trail he'd left behind, a corkscrew of dread winding in her stomach with every snapped twig. Then she heard it. A familiar chuckle, raspy and comforting. "Ilara? Is that you, little bird?" Ilara stopped dead. It was her father's voice, with the familiar warmth that she had heard so often. Relief washed over her, so strong her knees nearly buckled. "Papa?" she cried out, her voice shaking. "Papa, where are you?" The voice repeated, louder now, closer this time. "Only a bit more, Ilara. I'm right over here. Hurry, I'm a bit lost." She forced her way through a thicket of prickled bushes, her heart pounding in her chest. And then she saw it, or rather him. It looked like her father. The same wide shoulders, the same weather-beaten face, the same slightly bent gait. But something was horribly, irreparably wrong. His face contorted into a wretched grin. A wide, unnatural stretch of teeth, pulling his lips so thin they seemed ready to break. It was a smile that didn't touch his eyes, cold, empty pools that held no fucking trace of the man she knew better than she knew herself. "Papa?" she said, her voice catching in her throat. The figure laughed again, the sound rubbing her nerves raw. "Ilara, my little bird. What took you so long?" It was still her father giving the voice to the words, but the bestial grin distorted them, hanging grotesque mockery on them with every syllable. And Ilara knew in her marrow that this was not her father. This was the smiling beast, the legend spoken of in low voices around crackling fires. A monster that would imitate voices, drawing the unwary to their doom, forever wearing that hideous, unblinking smile. And she raised the axe, her hands trembling. "Who are you?" she insisted, attempting to sound more confident than she felt. The smiling beast cocked its head, its grin spreading impossibly wide. "Don't you know your father, little bird? Are you afraid of me?" Ilara didn't answer. She zeroed in on the hollow eyes, the sole thing that betrayed the monstrosity simmering below the recognizable exterior. This wasn't her father. Her father wouldn't wear that grotesque, mocking smile. "Where is he?" she finally choked out. "What did you do with him?" The smiling beast stepped forward, its smile resolute. "He's busy, but soon enough you can join him. We'll all be a happy family at last." Ilara knew she had to act. To hesitate would be her death. Holding her breath, she lunged, bellowing a battle cry that was lost among the leaves. The smiling beast was faster than I expected. It avoided her lumbering swing, never breaking its smile. Claws, made into deadly points, raked across her arm, leaving a line of fire on her skin. She recoiled, pain shooting up her arm. Despair loomed, but she pushed back against it. Her father had taught her to be strong, to find resilience. She wouldn't let him down. She recalled a story he used to tell, one about a hunter who killed the smiling beast by taking advantage of its vanity. It valued its grin above all else, they said. Ilara scooped a handful of mud and berries with her uninjured hand and lunged forward again. This time, instead of swinging the axe, she threw the mixture into the smiling beast's face. The grin faltered. For the first time, Ilara saw a glint of something other than the cool void in its eye. The creature writhed, raking its claws across its face, its voice a low growl. "My face, you dare." Ilara could not let the opportunity pass her by. She lifted the axe high above her head and swung it down with all her strength. The blade sank deep between the creature's shoulder blades, sending a jolt up her arm. The smiling beast roared, a sound that vibrated the stillness of the woods, but the smile was no longer on his face. Its face an agony of fury and pain. It reeled, its disguise crumbling in the face of my determination. It sprang again, but its movements were slower, less precise. Elara ducked, decades of life on the run sharpening her instincts, and lunged in again and again. Then she swung one last time, desperately, the axe crashing down upon its head. The smiling beast fell to the floor, its fabricated body melting away to form a puddle of decomposing leaves and black ichor. Elara stood, panting, caked in mud and blood, the axe heavy in her hand. Then the forest was silent again, the dense feeling lifted like fog. She knew the battle wasn't over. But now she still needed to look for her father. After some time with shattered branches and disturbed earth, she discovered a small cave hidden behind a waterfall. Inside, her father lay bound and unconscious. He was alive. She untied him and cradled his head in her lap, tears streaming down her face. He stirred, groaned, and opened his eyes. "Elara," he rasped, his voice weak. What happened?" Her voice shook with emotion as she confided everything to him. When she was done, he gathered her to him, his arms folded and sure. "You're a brave girl, Elara," he said, the words heavy with pride. "You saved me." Hand in hand, they left the cave, heading back to the forest. Sunshine filtered through the trees, warm to the touch and soothing to the spirit. The quiet had been replaced with birdsong, merrily chirping away. The smiling beast was gone. But deep down, Elara knew that monsters, they came in all shapes and sizes, and some wore smiling faces of those you loved. And she figured that she, her father's little bird, would be waiting for them. She always would be. The thing in the water. A thick and heavy summer air brooded over Lake Serenity, a name that was as untrue as it was ironic, if such truth could ever be measured against irony. Pines grew thickly around its glassy surface, mirroring the blue sky above in a treacherous veneer. Tourists poured in, enticed by the lure of crisp water, sun-soaked beaches, and postcard-worthy tranquility. They didn't know the truth. They had no idea about the thing in the water. Old Man Hemlock, who lived in a run-down cabin above the lake, certainly did. He'd seen it, or I suppose not seen it, for years. He had witnessed the instant, unexplainable vanishments, the frantic screams severed mid-sentence, the eerie silence that ensued. He knew the lake wasn't devouring people, it was nourishing them. He had tried to warn them, of course. He'd stood on the bank of the lake in tatters, a thin scarecrow with a voice scratchy as dried leaves, bellowing about the hidden monster. But they just laughed and told him he was a crazy old coot and went back to splashing in the water. And this year a bunch of college students, all youthful arrogance and sufficiently uncaring of any advice their elders could offer, had pitched tents along the west shore. They were loud, raucous, and oblivious. Hemlock observed them with a heart made of lead. The most adventurous among us, Sarah was the first to succumb to its charms. She was a powerful swimmer, self-assured and rebellious. One afternoon she declared she was swimming to the little island in the middle of the lake. The others were shouting encouragement, voices bouncing over the water. Hemlock stood on his porch, his stomach churning. He watched Sarah reach the center of the lake, her strokes steady and confident. And then she was gone in a heartbeat. No fight, no cry, not even a ripple on the generally flat surface. Immediate help came from other students standing on the beach. Panic erupted. They yelled Sarah's name and scanned the water, but it was too late. Sarah's boyfriend, Mark, was shriveled with grief. He said he could not accept that she was dead. "She's just playing with us," he said, straining as he spoke. He put together a search party, but nothing was found in the lake. Days passed, and a morbid curiosity seized Mark. He was fixated on finding Sarah, on figuring out what had happened. He grilled Hemlock, hungry for the truth. Hemlock hesitated. He knew what was down there, but he could not explain it. It wasn't something that could be explained through logic. It was a primal horror, a force of nature that could not be explained. Finally, under pressure from Mark and feeling guilty for not trying harder to warn them, Hemlock relented. He recounted the disappearances, the stories that had been whispered in hushed tones for generations, the sense of dread that hung over the lake like a shroud. Mark scoffed. "A monster? That's ridiculous. There must be some logical explanation. Hemlock shook his head sadly. There is no rationality here, boy. This lake, it's something else. Something ancient. Mark still went skeptical but could not remove Hemlock's words from his head. He began studying the lake's history, scanning old maps and local legends. He discovered accounts of mysterious drownings going every century back, stories about a dark thing that lived in the deep, a creature that demanded a yearly sacrifice. He found no evidence, only whispers and rumors. But the whispers were enough. Deep down he knew that Hemlock was right. On a moonless night, Mark went out in a small boat on the lake. He carried a fishing net, a harpoon he had made himself, and a burning desire for revenge. He paddled out to the point that Sarah had gone missing and his heart raced. The lake was eerily still. There was nothing but the sound of water lapping against the boat hull. He lowered the net into the water, allowing it to sink to the bottom. Then he waited. For hours nothing happened. He was beginning to have doubts and wonder if he was losing his mind. Maybe Hemlock was simply a confused old man. Maybe there was no monster. Just as he was about to lose hope, the boat lurched violently. The water around it roiled and bubbled. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the sides. The net caught something heavy, impossibly heavy. Mark fought to pull against whatever was hanging above him. He felt a pull, a strong, unyielding force pulling back. He knew then that he had it. He used to have the thing in the water. He pulled on the net, his muscles screaming. Bit by bit, painfully, something began to ascend from below. He caught a flash of something dark and slick and impossibly big. Then he gave one last terrible heave and pulled the net free. But rather than heaving the monster into the boat, he dragged it closer. He dragged it into the shallow, murky water near the boat. He saw it then, or rather he felt it. An enormous pressure, a cold, smothering weight that cloaked him, dragging him further down. He tussled and kicked and yelled, but it was useless. The thing in the water was too powerful. Its chill, silent embrace closed on him and pulled him into the deep blackness. Old Man Hemlock stood on his porch and looked as the boat floundered back and forth on the lake. He sighed, and it was a sound as old and tired as the lake. The thing in the water had taken its due. Lake Serenity was anything but serene. And so the cycle of secrets, fear, and death was repeated, endlessly, beneath a deceptively calm surface. The tunnel dweller. The sound of steel screaming against steel was the sacred lullaby, the reassurance of the late shift. To Leo, patrolling the tunnels of the West Side Line was purgatorial penance. He had made a mistake, a big one, and this was his second chance. The darkness echoed his shame, but also a strange sort of peace. The air tonight was thick and damp, clinging to his skin like a shroud. He pushed his hard hat down his head, the beam of his flashlight slicing a thin tunnel through the claustrophobic passage. Just routine checks. Track integrity, ventilation, the usual. Then he saw it. A flicker, a shadow that roamed by the bounds of his light. He halted, reaching instinctively for the emergency radio he wore at his waist. Dispatch, this is Leo, Section 3. I might have a trespasser. Copy that, Leo. Keep your distance. We'll alert security. The voice was a pinprick in his ear, a baby rattle of comfort against the deafening hush. He advanced slowly, the beam of his flashlight wavering. The shape emerged slowly, painfully from the gloom. It was human-shaped, but wrong. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tightly across a skeletal body. It was a thin, hunched being, impossibly thin, long, spindly limbs. Its eyes, round and inky, received the light and bounced it back with an uncanny intensity. It didn't move, didn't say anything, just looked. Leo felt a catch of breath in his throat. It wasn't a trespasser. It was something else. Something other. He stepped back, his heart pounding in his chest. Hey, who are you? What are you doing here? His voice was shaking, revealing the fear that was growing inside of him. The figure tilted its head, the motion jerky and unnatural. It shambled toward it, its naked feet scraping soundlessly against the rail ties. Now Leo could see the matted, white hair sticking to its head, the deeply set hollows of its cheeks. Dispatch, I don't think this is a trespasser, he sputtered into his radio. It's something else. I need backup. Now. The creature halted inches away, its dark eyes boring into Leo's. An inexplicable surge of nausea, the primal fear caught him by the throat. But around them, in the tunnel, he could sense the unnatural stillness. Even the rumble of the city above appeared muffled. Then it spoke. The voice was a dusty, rattling whisper, like wind through dead leaves. Lost. Leo swallowed hard. Lost? You're lost? What are you doing down here? The creature took a step toward her again. Now Leo could smell it, an acrid, earthy stench that made him think of moist dirt and rot. Home, it whispered, eyes fixed upon me. This is home. Leo's mind raced. He'd heard murmurs among the older workers of a legend, a warning told in break rooms and darkened corners. The tunnel dweller. A creature that's free to roam, that was driven mad by the echoing darkness, the unending growl of the trains. A creature, one that had adapted, evolved, to exist only in the twists of the maze below the city. He attributed them to folklore. But now, gazing into those unfathomable black eyes, he wasn't sure at all. He attempted to back away again and stumbled. His foot snagged on a rail tie. He faltered, spilling his flashlight. The beam rolled away, leaving them in near darkness. Panic surged through him. He grappled for the flashlight, his fingers fumbling through the darkness. He heard the creature coming closer, its whisper unending and unsettling. He recovered the flashlight and turned it back on. The beam hit again, freezing the creature in place. Its face, inches from his face, its breath a cold, spectral whisper on the cheek. Leo closed his eyes tight, waiting for something. An attack. An explanation? He didn't know. He just waited. Then a different sound. The low rumble of a train in the distance, getting louder, closer. The beast froze, its head tilted to one side, listening. It stepped back, its eyes widening as if recalling a long-buried memory. Hurt? It whispered with a kind of strange childlike fear in its voice. They hurt. The train was almost upon them. Leo felt it vibrating in his chest, felt it flow air as it swept through the tunnel. He seized the arm of the creature, yanking it back against the wall. Stay back. It's dangerous. The train thundered past like a streak of steel and light. There was a tremor through the tunnel, a tang of hot metal and ozone in the air. When the noise faded, Leo turned his gaze backwards at the creature. It was gone. He swung his flashlight up and down the tunnel to no avail. Now he was alone again, silence thicker than ever. Dispatch crackled in his ear. Leo, are you all right? We're sending a team down. What happened? He drew a breath while collecting his composure. False alarm, he said, his voice still trembling. I thought I saw something, the shadows. He knew they simply wouldn't believe him. If I hadn't seen it myself, I wouldn't believe him either. But he couldn't tell them the truth. Not yet. He prowled the tunnels the entire evening, his eyes ever trained on the gloom. He never encountered the tunnel dweller again. But he knew it was around, somewhere, hiding in plain sight. His stints in the tunnels had ceased to be a penance. They were a vigil. Now he had a secret, a dreadful truth he held with him in the darkness. And he felt, deep down, that he would see it again. There was a feeling he wasn't through with him yet, the tunnel dweller. He wasn't just patrolling anymore. He was waiting.